Welcome back. In this lesson we're going to be building a hand as well as the connection between the forearm and the wrist. I've done a little bit of renaming in the outliner, so let's go ahead and open up the outliner and rename some things. It's under Window Outliner. I've got mine open right here. So I've renamed the joints. This is now called wrist. The next one up here is the elbow, and the shoulder piece that we created in the last lesson is called shoulder. I've left this as pull 5. The connections in between here are pull forearm 1 and 2. I've got my group here for the forearm that includes all the rivets. And we're going to group these together in two sections, the upper and lower arm. And the reason being that we're going to move the pivot points around after we finish modeling the entire arm and hand and copying it over. We want to make sure that our pivot points are where they need to be. Since we're not using an IK rig to pose this, we're going to have the pivot points located on the joints. So in this case we'll have one on the wrist for the hand, the elbow, and one for the shoulder. And we'll need to have everything grouped appropriately to do that sort of thing. So I drug a marquee around the lower part of the arm, and I'm going to hit Control G on the keyboard, double click on that and call that lower arm group. And then I'll drag a marquee on the upper part, the forearm, shoulder, and pull 5, and hit Control G, double click on that and call that upper arm group. After we complete the hand, we'll go ahead and move the pivot points around, but for now just make sure you have your upper and lower groups in place. Okay, and let's get started. Let's go ahead and close that and get started with modeling the hand. I'm going to start off with a polygon cube. If you don't have that on your shelf, it's under Create, Polygon Primitives. Make sure the interactive creation is turned off and select Cube. W on the keyboard to move it up. I'm just moving it straight up in Y and over in X, placing it down here. If we go to our top view, we can actually scale this, position it correctly. So R on the keyboard, I'm going to scale it in Z first. Looks like it's about this wide. You can see my numbers over here. Okay. And let's add some subdivisions to that. It's a little bit thick here, so let's just scale it down in Y. And under inputs, we have our polycube over here. And let's add some subdivisions in the width. Let's put 3 there, 2 in the height, and 3 in the depth. Okay, he's going to have 3 fingers and a thumb. So that's why I've got the 3 divisions across here. And then we added a little bit more resolution just to shape this. Okay, so let's go ahead and leave the palm as is for right now and start working on the first finger. We're going to create another cube and bring that up into position. Bringing it down here. I'm going to hit F on the keyboard to frame up on it. And we'll slide that over here, scale it down. This is just the first section on the index finger, so I'm going to place it right about there. And we're going to need some joints in between here, and I'm just going to copy the wrist joint, Control D, and move that over, and we'll scale that down. It's R on the keyboard. I'm going to scale it uniformly, grabbing the center manipulator, and then scale it in Z. Make it a little shorter. And let's go ahead and do this from our top view again, just so we can be a little bit more accurate. All right, that looks about right. And I can actually move this down just a little bit. Okay, so those look pretty evenly spaced. Let's come out here and check them in perspective mode. We've got to move it up a little bit. I'm going to tuck it in underneath here. We're going to actually have a knuckle sitting on top, made from one of our rivets. So I'm going to drop this down a little bit, move this forward, and let's go ahead and shape this now. I'm going to drop in an edge loop here on the top, as well as one towards the bottom. And I'm going to select the face over here and extrude that out. Make sure we're in world space. It's just something simple like that. Do the same thing on this side. So extrude that out. Okay. And let's duplicate the joint. Control D. Move that in X. Just bring it up here. We're going to scale this one down a little bit more. This is our next joint. Doesn't need to be quite as big. All right, and let's take a look at this piece. You can see it's collapsing a little bit too much. We're going to have to put some edge loops in before we copy that. Let's go back to 1 on the keyboard. I'm going to insert an edge loop here. One along that point right there, this face. Probably back off just a little bit. And we'll probably need a couple running down the sides here just to hold it together. Let's hit 3 on the keyboard, Q to get out of that. And that looks about right. I think we can grab the vertices on the very bottom, so all the way around the bottom, like that. Scale them in uniformly. This will just kind of round it out a little bit. Maybe scale it in a little bit more in Z. And I think we can probably do the same with the top. The entire top row of vertices, all of those. And I'm just going to scale those in Z. And maybe we'll just elongate them, create a little bit of an angle. So that's scaling them in X right there. Let's get out of that. I'm going to double click on these 2 edges right here. So this one, shift and double click on that. And just move those down in Y a little bit, just to create a little bit of a rounded edge here, just so we're kind of following the curvature of our joint. And maybe just bring the joint up a little bit higher, and I think it could probably be just a little bit smaller too. And let's move that in there nice and close. That looks good. Okay, so with that shaped, let's hit Control D and duplicate it. Slide that piece up. And I don't want to see much of a gap between these 2 pieces here, so I'm going to try to really push these in tight. I don't want them intersecting, but we'll get them as close as possible. Okay, so we've got a little bit of a gap up here. I'm going to correct that by just grabbing this front row of vertices, pulling them forward a little bit. And I think even these ones down here on the bottom can be brought in a little bit more. Okay, I can do the same thing over here. Grab the vertices and pull those out like that, as well as the ones on the bottom. All right, so they're not quite touching on top here. Select those both. Let's go to 3 on the keyboard and take a look at that. So those are fitting around our joint quite nicely now. We need to shape this end up here for the fingertip. So let's grab the vertices along the front here. We'll start off with these 2, kind of pull them down and out a little bit, and then grab this whole group and sort of bring it out, maybe down a little bit. We may actually want to just delete this whole edge going around here. So I'm going to double click on this edge and delete both the vertices and the edge. And let's grab this edge right here. I double clicked on it, pull it out to kind of round it out. Same thing here. Just kind of rounding that out a little bit. And grabbing these 3 edges as well, rounding those out. Okay, so we could possibly shape a little bit of a fingernail up here. We can do that by selecting the faces on the top. these 6 faces and extruding them and just pulling them up a little bit, so just kind of raising the end. All right. And just back to object mode here. And it's a little bit squared off, just looking down from the top kind of angle here. I'm going to grab these vertices, in fact all of these right here, running along the front, and just pull those out a little bit. That rounds our finger out on the end. That looks a little bit better. Okay. So now let's make the knuckle. Control D, duplicate it, drag it down here. This has the original transforms on it. So if I go over to my channel box editor, I can take out the 90 degrees that we rotated it, as well as the rotation in Y. Okay, so just zeroing out those rotations and bringing that down place here. And let's go ahead and fill the hole under here by double-clicking on the inside edge, coming under Mesh, Fill Hole. We'll need to quad that off now. Let's go back to 1 on the keyboard and activate our Split Polygon tool. Activate that again. So I'm clicking and dragging on the edge until it hits the other vertice. So it's click and drag, let go, click and drag until it snaps into place, letting go. I click it down, I'm holding on the left mouse button, dragging it across that edge until it hits that vertice on that other edge, letting it go, and then doing the same thing down here, just clicking and dragging, and then hitting enter on the keyboard. So we've quadded that off now. Let's just grab the vertices on the bottom and bring those up a little bit. Back to object mode. Let's come to our top view. It'll be a little bit easier to position this, scale it right. So I'm lining it up that way as well as this way, so I'm centering it on the other pieces of geometry. Okay, so kind of covering up the end of that finger. So let's grab a pole from back here that's already scaled down some. Control D, W on the keyboard, and we'll move that down here. We're going to take that -90 rotation off that we have in the Z channel. Just zero that out. It's facing up and down now, how we want it. I'm going to drag it over here and scale it down quite a bit. There it is. And we'll need to come into our top view and line that up. There we go. This needs to be lined up again. All right, so those are all in position now. So with that done, we can open up our outliner. And this is still linked to the torso, so we need to drag that out of that rivet group. Maybe bring it clear down to here. It's going to be part of the finger, so I'm actually going to drag a marquee around all these pieces we just made for the finger and group those together. Call that index finger. All right, and we can duplicate that, Control D, and if you hit W on the keyboard, you can see that the group has brought the pivot back down to here. Let's center the pivot. That's under Modify Center Pivot if you don't have it on your shelf. So just grab it and move it over in C and line it up here. Let's come to our top view. Line them up a little bit better. So I'm lining it up with the center of the hand there. Is about right. And Control D again. And we'll copy and move that out. The outside, that's the pinky finger. We'll rename those. Okay, so just double click over here. Pinky. This was our middle finger. All right, so we've got those. Let's shape the palm first and then we'll create the thumb. Let's come back out to our perspective view and select the palm. Let's go ahead and rename that. We hit 3 on the keyboard. We can see it's rounding out pretty nicely. We may want to just grab this face here on the lower part of the palm, inside, and kind of pull it up a little bit. Probably shaped okay. Maybe we can drop in a couple edge loops. Drop in an edge loop right here, one here, there, and there. All right, let's try that. Okay. And if you want to round those out a little bit, you can definitely do that. You can grab some of the faces along here and pull those out. This is going to be the thumb area. So we may actually even extrude those. Let's pull them out first a little bit around that area and then extrude the group out. So our thumb's going to come off of there. All right. And we can grab these faces over here on this side and just pull them out a little bit to round it. Okay. All right, so let's make the thumb now. Let's just grab from the outliner, let's grab the index finger, and I'm going to hit Control D. W on the keyboard, we're going to center that pivot point again. And we're going to actually have to change the pivot point to down here in just a moment. But let's go ahead and kind of scale our pieces. They're a little out of proportion for the thumb. It needs to maintain the same thickness, but we need to kind of reduce the length on these. So I'm going to select the vertices on this first section and just grab the whole group on one end, shorten that down, grab this joint, push it down there, bring this down, get that into position, and grab the vertices on the end here with the marquee and shorten that down as well. Let's come out here in the outliner and rename it Thumb. And we can move the pivot point now. Let's do that from the top view. So the way you move a pivot point is hitting the Insert key. You can see the translator has changed to this kind of box with a little target inside there. I'm only going to move the red one, that's the X axis, and I'm going to just click and drag it all the way down until it intersects right here in the center, our knuckle piece. Looks like we need to quad that off right there as well, or maybe delete the face. And once we have it in position, we can just hit Insert again, and we'll go back to the standard manipulator. So I think that was this piece right here. We've got some, probably going to have to go and clean that up in some of our other ones. We don't actually need these faces. So I'm just going to select it and hit Delete. And same thing on the bottom here. So that's something we'll have to go back and do. Let's go through those and kind of clean them up. And position that back in the center. Okay. So we've got our thumb now with the pivot point down here, and what that allows us to do, if we hit E on the keyboard, we can rotate it properly from that pivot. And it looks like it needs to come down a little bit. And we'll need some kind of a connection here. I think we need to extrude these faces out a little bit more. But thumbs typically kind of angle down a little bit. Sometimes they even angle out a little bit to the side. So we can do all of that now. All right, so we can see we've got a little bit of an intersection going on here. So let's go ahead and maybe grab these faces here and push them back in a little bit. Probably should not have extruded these, so I think what I might do is just go ahead and delete them and just fill that hole up and redraw. So let's delete those. I'm going to go back to 1 here so I can see a little bit better. And we'll just fill that hole by double-clicking on the edges. Mesh, fill hole, and we need to draw some edges back in here. Let's do that with the split polygon tool. So I'm going to start from this corner here down to here. So from here to about here, and last one's going from here out to this corner here. Okay, so we've redrawn those, kind of created an indent for our thumb area. I'm going to take the thumb and actually move it up and over so it sort of fits like that around there. And we need probably a little bit of an angle on these faces here. So I'm just going to select the faces, E on the keyboard, and we'll angle them out like this, and then pull them out a little bit. Okay. Positioning thumbs is always a little bit challenging, so let's kind of drop that right there. Right, so we need to make a connection from this thumb joint right here over to the palm. And what I'm going to do is just select one of these joints over here. We're going to have to drag it out of that group and into the thumb group, but let's just hit Control D and bring that out and over. Position it here. We're going to need to rotate it. So 90 degrees in X first, and then we're going to rotate it in the Y-axis, lining it up with our other angle, and just kind of positioning that in the center here. Let's go ahead and scale it up quite a bit and move it down. Okay, let's grab the thumb and just kind of pull that up a little bit. All right, so that looks about right. So this is all lining up. Got our connection there. Select the palm, hit 3 on the keyboard. See how that is looking. Probably slide the thumb back just a little. Don't want it intersecting here, but very tight. Okay, and I think we need to pull this joint out that we copied. It's in our index finger, so let's just grab that and drag and drop that into the thumb. Let's collapse that and grab everything. Just drag a marquee around the entire hand. Control G, group that, call that hand. Group. And we still need a couple more connections here along the wrist area. We need to put a connection with one of our little poles between the wrist and the palm, as well as creating an area right here to kind of fill this sort of cavity. I'm going to actually use the shoulder for that, so I'm going to duplicate it, bring that down here. We'll have to move it out of that upper arm into the lower arm group. So I've got that down here now. I'm going to rotate it around 180 degrees in Z. You just type in 180. And we'll move that back in. Inside the arm area, maybe scale it up a little bit. You don't want it coming through like that. You want to make sure it's not intersecting. And I'm going to push it back just a little bit more. And Okay, and let's grab a couple of the posts right here on the lower arm. Control D, duplicate that, drop that in here, scale it up. Position that, Control D again, bring that one up to the wrist area. Line them both up. Okay. And let's just make sure we drag this piece out of the upper arm. And we'll rename that as well. So I'm going to click on that piece and drag and drop it into the lower arm group. So it's in there now. And we'll just call that forearm socket. All right, so let's collapse all of these groups here. We should have everything in place. And in the next lesson, I'm going to duplicate this over and show you how to position the pivot points. And we'll go ahead and do that in the next lesson.